Hi, my name is Kirsty Page, and in this short video we're going to talk about the skills that influence children's ability to write at word level and to move on and have a level of spelling skill. Now, of course, I want my children to work towards and as quickly as possible to write at word level, particularly for high frequency and common words, even those that are phonetically spelt. Because when I am writing, ideally, I am generating ideas and I'm generating words and sentences that go with those ideas. And I'm holding all of that in my memory. And when I am holding words in a sentence that I want to write down, if I'm writing every single thing longer term using phonics, my auditory memory is going to be swamped because I'm holding words and then I'm having to hold sounds at the same time whilst I'm still holding those words. When children make that transition and begin to write more at word level, then what we see is we see that auditory memory capacity and capability can be freed up to hold the words and the meaning, not breaking every single word down into sound. So that's a really important transition to make. And of course, the vast majority of that transition is based on visual skill and word recognition so that children can remember what words look like, but also a motor program, not for one letter at a time, but a motor program so that when I write and, this is what I do, and it's almost like one motor program that goes from my brain down to my hand. So that's kind of important. But what I want to look at in a little bit more detail are the skills that will feed into spelling. And one of the main skills that we need to think about are the visual skills, which for those of you who have Launchpad is over to the right. And the skills that particularly come into play with spelling will be those visual sequential memory skills that we see closer to the top, so that children are aware of the pattern of letters and the order of that pattern. So, for example, if a child has spelt you as in but spelt it Y-U-O, that we know for some children they will have a look at that word after they've written it in the wrong order and they'll straight away see that that order isn't correct. Whereas for other children you might say, have a look, does that look right? Yeah, that looks right. And so it's with this depth and slightly higher level visual skill, which is sequential visual memory, which often can cause problems for some children where there are gaps. And certainly if you're looking at kind of high frequency reading, but also kind of spelling, it's really interesting to look at whether a child's ability is affected by the number of letters and the length of that word, the length of the word that they've got to remember, and the length of the pattern and the sequence that they have to remember. But again, to kind of have a systematic approach and to kind of lay the foundations for future spelling, then working on visual skill is really important, and not just working on visual skill to the point where children can cope with numbers and letters and think, oh, okay, we're done with visual. To keep kind of going with that skill-based work, so that even alongside more simplistic letter recognition and more simplistic writing in kind of in those early stages of formal learning, we're still alongside that developing that depth of visual skill so that children can cope with the demands of what is coming next. I think the other thing that's important to kind of know and to consider in relation to spelling as well is about the role of vocabulary, which again for those of you on Launchpad is located here. And the main kind of skill to consider are those homophones, which sometimes are spelt the same but often will have a different spelling pattern. So homophones obviously are those words that sound the same but they have a different meaning. So if we're thinking about a homophone like pain, for example, we have two spellings of pain. We've got the pain where it might be a pain in your tummy, for example, and we've got the pane as in a pane of glass in a window. Now, I will be a better speller if I know both meanings of the word pain, so to speak. And I will be more able to remember if I am able to say, okay, so when it's like a physical pain, like a pain in your tummy, you spell it like this. And when it's a pain, like in as in a pane of glass, you spell it like that. So for a lot of our children with language delays, for a lot of our children who are newer to English, it is quite difficult to hang these spelling differences and these spelling patterns onto their vocabulary, because it might be that the children know one meaning of a word, but they don't know the other meaning of the word. And so within this, we have to have that bottom up approach to kind of say, we're not going to be teaching you to read or write these words in when we first get started, but we're going to be very aware within our vocabulary expansion work as we talk about and share the world together. We're going to be really aware that to deliberately create opportunities to build an understanding of these homophones that will be later expected in your spelling is an important kind of foundation brick to lay. In the same way, I think it's important to think about the grammatical structures that will feed into future spelling and writing patterns. So, for example, we have your, as in it is your hat, for example, or we have your as in you are. And for many even older children, they may mix those up and use the wrong one or not kind of understand the difference. So when I talk to schools, I often kind of say, well, look at what it is that a few or some of your older children find a bit tricky, and then track that back. And that doesn't mean that you sit your nursery children down to learn how to spell your. All that means is that when I am adding language with my children in nursery, I don't know, if we're in the sand and we're digging, for example, my natural use of language would be to say, I'm digging in the contracted form, rather than I am digging, I'm digging, you're digging. Nothing wrong with that at all. And I don't want to do this every time I talk, because I don't want to change the natural use of language that I will normally have. But sometimes, if we were in the in the sand and we were digging or doing whatever. This isn't kind of resource specific. I am going to deliberately sometimes say, you are digging and I am digging, so that children get chances to hear grammar in its full form and in its collapsed, condensed form as well. So that when in the future somebody is talking to the children about putting you apostrophe RE and saying, oh, well, that's your, as in short for you are, but we don't write it like your because that's like in, oh, that's like your hat. That this is not the first time that children are aware of the difference between the word your. It's been fed into them in a, not in a false way, but in a deliberate opportunity creating way when they're younger, to kind of put that understanding in place, and that later on when somebody then starts to tell them about how that should look and how that should be written down, I've got the understanding and I've got the language skill in place, and then we're going to work out the written code. Whereas for many children, we're trying to talk to them about the written code, and that language kind of foundation is either not in place or it's pretty rocky. Okay, well, thank you for your time, and we will look at other chunks of language in other chunks of writing, should I say, in other videos. Thank you for your time.